Before we start the meeting, I've got a few housekeeping announcements to make. First of all, there are no planned fire alarm tests today. So if you do hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit, which is in that direction, and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is St John's Churchyard off Druid Street in that direction. If you're unfamiliar with that, council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area in that direction. There's also a refreshment machine to use by members of the public in the waiting area outside this room. And hopefully you'll be able to work out how to use it because it's not straightforward. Finally, please switch your mobile phone to silent whilst you're in the meeting room. This meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Members of the public are also welcome to film, audio record, photograph or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. I'd ask you to please be considerate to other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you are filming the meeting, please do not film the audience. Keep any cameras facing towards these front tables at this end of the room. If you want to access the council's Wi-Fi, the code is capital F, little r, 33, capital W, little I, little f, little I, exclamation mark. During the meeting, members of the committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting. Send or receive emails, text messages or tweets concerning the business of the committee. I'd also like to remind speakers to use the microphone when speaking, as it's only the audio from the microphones that can be captured on the live stream, and not to place their mobile devices near the microphones to avoid interference. Have we any apologies for absence from the meeting? I have 3, I believe. Councillor Cleo Soanes, Councillor Ellie Cumbo and Councillor Nick Johnson. And we also have apologies for lateness from Councillor Roberts, who will be with us shortly. I think everybody else is here. I'll wait for Councillor Lealing to take his seat and then we'll take confirmation of voting members.
I want to issue apologies for smelly stir fry as well.
Actually, whilst Councillor Lealing is getting ready, can we do perhaps a quick introduction of the officers here at the meeting? Start with Alex.
I'm Alex Oyebade, Team Leader Transport Planning for Southwark.
Hello, I'm Michael Sakaris, Design, Conservation and Transport, Southwark.
Terence McQuillan, the Strategic Applications Team, Southwark.
I'm Gerald Gola, I'm a Constitutional Officer here at Southwark and I'm the Committee Clerk.
Nagla Stevens, Deputy Head of Law.
Colin Wilson, Head of Strategic Development.
So we'll run through the voting members of the committee. I'm Councillor Richard Livingstone. I'm a councillor for Old Kent Road Ward. I'm going to pass to Councillor Papula, I think.
Hi, I'm Reginald Papula, councillor for Nunnery Queens Road.
Councillor Kath Whittam, Vice Chair of the Committee and Member for Rotherhithe Ward.
Councillor Richard Lealing, Councillor for Dulwich Village.
And if we just confirm voting members of the committee. Thank you. And that's 4 votes and we expect a 5th one to join us. So item 3 on the agenda, notification of any items of business which the Chair deems urgent. We've received an addendum report and a members' pack which have been circulated. In addition, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the fact that item 6 regarding plot H1 Elephant Park, that's the land bounded by Walworth Road, Elephant Road, Deacon Street and Sayer Street North at the Elephant and Castle, London SE1, is being heard only to decide on an additional reason for its refusal. This means there'll be no opportunity for applicants, objectors, supporters or ward councillors to address the committee about this item. That brings us to item 4, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? I would like to just to note that in relation to item 7.2 at St James's Road, I'm the ward councillor for that area. However, I'm going to keep an open mind as to the merits or otherwise of this application. I don't have a predetermined view on the matter. That brings us to the minutes of the previous meeting, which is set out pages 1 to 3 of the main agenda pack. We've had a couple of very minor amendments that I'd like to flag up to the committee. First of all, in the list of people present, the minutes omitted to note that Councillor Whittam was Vice Chair of the committee, so I'd like to make that addition. And secondly, under apologies on item 1, Councillor Leeming should be noted as having recorded his apologies for that meeting. So with those two minor amendments, are we happy to agree those minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you, everybody. That brings us to item 6, which is application 21 AP 1819. That's plot H1 at Elephant Park, the land bounded by Walworth Road, Elephant Road, Deacon Street and Sayre Street North at the Elephant and Castle, London, SE1, on pages 4 to 18 of the main agenda pack. As I've already stated, this is being heard only to decide on an additional reason for refusals. This was a decision that was made at a previous meeting. This means there's no opportunity for applicants, objectors, supporters or ward councillors to address the committee about this item. So, would officers like to introduce the report, please?
Point of order, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
As I wasn't present at the earlier meeting, am I allowed to vote on this one? Should a vote be required?
You should probably sit this one out, Councillor.
Thank you.
I'll make a note of that as well.
Okay, so it'll only be councillors Papula, Whittam and myself that will be voting on this item.
Thank you, Chair. On the 4th of October 2022, a meeting of the Planning Committee resolved that planning permission for plot H1 should be refused, and 2 grounds for refusal given. One, design, and the other, harmful impact on neighbouring amenity. And those reasons for refusal are set out in the approved minutes of that meeting, which are attached as appendix to the report. Since committee resolved to refuse the scheme, it was referred to the Mayor of London, and the Mayor of London has confirmed that the council may now issue the refusal decision. The applicant would then have a right of appeal to the Planning Inspectorate, and as we understand it, the applicant is likely to appeal, and that will probably follow on in the new year. We are recommending that an additional reason for refusal is placed on the decision that we issue, and that would include that there is no completed legal agreement in place. In the main report that you considered back in October, there was a fairly extensive heads of terms for a Section 106 legal agreement, and that legal agreement would have mitigated, we felt as officers, many of the harms that might have arisen from the scheme. Because the scheme has been refused, there isn't a legal agreement in place. And so the recommendation is we add that lack of a legal agreement to the reasons for refusal. Should this go to an appeal, and we think it will do, as part of that appeal process, we will be asked by the Planning Inspectorate to provide a proposed Section 106 agreement that should the Secretary of State or the Planning Inspector rather recommend that planning permission is granted. So this is also relevant to that process as well. And so that is the recommendation, that an additional reason for refusal is added to the 2 already in place, and that's the lack of a completed Section 106 agreement, the details of which, had it been completed, are set out in the report.
So, Councillor Roberts, as you arrive partway through this item, we won't be able to take your vote. And I don't think you were at the meeting where we made the decision on this matter in any case, so we've just taken advice that Councillor Leeming, who wasn't present, also shouldn't take part in this debate. Councillor Papula, Councillor Whittam, any questions you'd like to raise on this matter? Okay, in that case, can I propose that we accept the recommendation as set out by officers? Is that agreed? Sorry. Oh, we need a seconder. Thank you, Gerald. That's seconded by Councillor Whittam. All those in favour? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. That brings us on to the development management items on the agenda. So next item of business concerns the determination of planning applications. I'd like to remind everyone of the committee the guidance that we have to conduct our business. First of all, officers will present a report outlining their recommendations and answer any questions raised by the committee. If present and wishing to speak, the following may then address the committee for no more than 3 minutes each. First of all, one spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. By now, you should have identified a single spokesperson. If there's more than one objector who wishes to speak, the time will be divided accordingly within the 3-minute time slot. Secondly, the applicant or their agent. Thirdly, a spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who live within 100 metres of the development site. And finally, a ward councillor representing the area affected by the proposal. Ward members in attendance and those nominated to speak on behalf of objectors, supporters and applicants should sit in the front row of the public gallery if they can. This is for ease of communication between the committee and the speaker in cases where issues need to be clarified later in the proceedings. It's not an opportunity to take part in the debate of the committee. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the proposal and should avoid repeating information which is already set out in the report. The meeting is not a hearing where all participants present evidence and can be cross-examined by other participants. At the end of each representation, the committee may ask questions of the presenter. Speakers should lead the committee to subjects they would wish to have further questioning on. After receiving all submissions, the committee will debate the application and consider the recommendation. This is a council committee meeting which is open to the public, but there shouldn't be any interruptions from the audience. And finally, I'd like everyone present to know that although this planning committee comprises of members of different political parties, we're not politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and based on the information contained within the relevant reports, together with consultation responses, any verbal submissions made today. So this is not about our political wants, and it's not about even our individual desires about applications. This is purely making a judgment against council planning policy. How we set out our approach to these applications is set out in Development Management Report at item 7 of the agenda for this meeting. And if members are happy to note the report, we will move to considering the planning applications. Is that agreed? Thank you. That brings us to Aylesbury Estate First Development Site, land bounded by Albany Road, Portland Street, Westmoreland Road and Bradnam Close at London SE17. And that's set out in pages. Councillor Whittam.
You haven't confirmed voting members.
That is, you're right, because I did that at the beginning. Before we move on, thank you, Councillor Whittam. Can we reconfirm those members that are able to vote in this meeting? Thank you. So that's with the addition of Councillor Roberts. Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Whittam. As I was saying, the Aylesbury Estate First Development Site, which is set out on pages 24 to 136 of the main agenda pack, and also pages 1 to 5 of the addendum report. So I'd like to ask Terence to present to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to draw members' attention to the addendum. The addendum covers recent statements made by the National Fire Chiefs Council regarding potential amendments to the building regulations around additional residential cores and taller buildings. The addendum sets out the process that the council would follow in the event that the building regulations change. The addendum also covers clarifications to item 7.1 regarding the development description, some corrections to the drawing numbers and corrections to the summary table. So item 7.1 on the agenda refers to the Aylesbury Estate First Development Site. It's shown outlined in red on the plan here. The remainder of the estate, which benefits from outline planning permission, is outlined in blue. The first development site measures approximately 4.4 hectares and previously accommodated 566 homes and ancillary garage accommodation spread over 8 predominantly residential blocks that ranged in height between 4 and 14 stories. The site is bound by Westmoreland Road to the north, Portland Street to the east, Albany Road to the south, and Bradenham Close to the west. The buildings were generally long, linear housing blocks with integrated garages and surrounding open space. The area immediately surrounding the site is largely residential in character, with building heights ranging from 2 to 10 stories. The plan that's shown on the screen just now shows how the first development site was approved. It was approved as 6 subplots, subplots 1, 2 and 3, which run left to right along the top, and then 4, 5 and 6, which run right to left along the bottom. It's been split up for delivery purposes into 3 phases. The application that's before us refers to FDSC, which is subplots 3 and 4, and is the area hatched in orange on the plan. And this plan gives you just a bit more detail on the actual subplots. So approval was first given to redevelop the FDS in August 2015 to provide 830 new homes on the 6 subplots that I've just referred to. The planning permission was amended in 2019 to allow an additional 12 homes, bringing the approved total to 842. The current application seeks to increase the total number of approved homes on the FDS to 902. This would be achieved through minor material amendments to subplots 3 and 4 in order to accommodate an additional 60 homes. On subplot 3, block 3A would increase in height from 3 to 4 stories, while block 3B would increase in height from 6 to 7 stories. The plans on the screen just now show you the comparison with the drawing on the left-hand side showing the permitted scheme and the drawing on the right-hand side showing the proposal. In detailed design terms, the character of subplot 3 would remain largely as approved, and a total of 21 new homes would be provided on that subplot. On subplot 4, subplot 4 is the building outlined in pink. I'll scroll through to a more, yeah. So this is subplot 4 as consented, and this is subplot 4 as proposed. This would accommodate an additional 39 homes, bringing the total across the 2 subplots to 60, and it would be achieved through increasing the height of the tower. So you can see as consented and as proposed. The new homes that would be provided on the 2 subplots would be a mixture of private and affordable. It would include 33 new private homes, 9 new social rented homes and 18 new intermediate homes. And as consented, the FDS would have delivered a total of 64% affordable housing by habitable room. The proposal would bring the total affordable housing on the FDS to 66%, so it would raise the proportion of affordable housing by 2%. It's noted that the affordable tenure split would decrease very slightly. As part of the approval, the tenure split across the whole of the FDS was 67% social rented to 33% intermediate. The proposed changes would make it 66% social rented and 34% intermediate, so it would be a change of 1%. But the headline story is that there would be more social rented homes than consented, and there would be the majority of the social rented homes that would be provided are there's a preference for the 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom units. All of the homes would meet the minimum space standards set out in the Southwark plan, and all of the homes would be well lit. A total of 70% of the homes would be dual aspect, which is generally in alignment with the extant consent, where the dual aspect rate was 71%. 10.2% of the homes would be provided as wheelchair units, which would be policy compliant as well. The extant scheme was designed to ensure that the scale and layout of the development would have no significant adverse impact on neighbouring occupiers and their living conditions. The amended scheme continues with these safeguards and has been designed to ensure that there would continue to be sufficient separation distances, both within the scheme and externally. The landscaping proposed for subplots 3 and 4, as well as the wider FDS, would be in alignment with the consent. Subplots 3 and 4 would provide an additional 5 trees over what was approved, bringing the total provision to 42. And subplots 3 and 4 would achieve an urban greening factor of 0.43, which is an improvement on the consented 0.32. In line with the extant consent, play space for under 5s and the 5 to 11 age group would be entirely provided on site. Under the consented scheme, the provision for the 12 plus age group was to be accommodated within Burgess Park alongside a Section 106 contribution of £107,814. In line with this approach, the uplift in 12 plus play space would also be accommodated within Burgess Park, and the payment secured in Section 106 would rise to £115,213. In terms of amenity impacts on surrounding properties, the proposed amendments would have minimal impact. All relevant separation distances set out in the SPD would be met or exceeded, and with regards to daylight and sunlight, all properties would remain compliant with the BRE standards. In design terms, the marginal increase in scale at blocks 3A and 3B, which I'll go back to on the presentation. So on these drawings, on the left-hand side is the approved scheme. On the right-hand side, it's the proposed scheme with the massing of the consented scheme outlined in red. We consider these changes in scale to be modest. The changes would complement the established character of the area, and they wouldn't have any adverse impacts on the adjoining conservation area. On subplot 4, which I'll move to, the amended scheme builds on the successful qualities of the consented scheme and develops them further with high quality materials and elegant proportions, as well as a successful top and base of the top and base of the tower. Again, same as before, the drawing on the left-hand side is consented. The drawing on the right-hand side is proposed with the consented outlined in red. Local and strategic views have also been considered, and the applicant submitted an amended built heritage and townscape visual impact assessment as part of the ES addendum. The proposal is likely to appear in the distant backdrop of the view of St Paul's Cathedral from Alexandra Palace. Officers are satisfied that the proposal does not interact with the dome of St Paul's, which is clearly visible, prominent and recognisable in the view, as are the western towers. And I can scroll through to, this is the view, and you can see the proposed building just here behind the western towers, but you can actually see the western towers very clearly. The building doesn't detract from your ability to appreciate the view. In transport terms, servicing, access and egress would all remain as consented and as such are considered acceptable. There would be an increase in cycle parking to accommodate the new homes following the methodology set out in policy P53 of the Southwark plan. There would be a requirement for 560 residential cycle parking spaces and 32 visitor cycle parking spaces. The proposal would see a total of 602 cycle parking spaces in addition to 56 short stay cycle parking spaces, and that significantly exceeds the policy requirement and is a positive aspect of the scheme. On energy, the remainder of the FDS achieved a 39.7% reduction in carbon emissions. The proposed amendments would see a 62% reduction in carbon emissions, thereby improving on the consent. A financial contribution of £379,335 is secured in order for the scheme to achieve carbon zero status for subplots 3 and 4. A deed of variation would be required to link any consent to the parent legal agreement, and the details of the planning obligations to be secured in the deed of variation are set out at paragraph 192 of the report. So in summary, the proposal would result in new homes, including new affordable homes on a well-connected, sustainable brownfield site with minimal additional impacts on existing residents and no significant environmental impacts. Having full regard to the environmental information submitted with the application, and having undertaken a full review of the proposals against the development plan, officers recommend that planning permission be granted, subject to conditions, referral to the Mayor of London, the information contained in the addendum, and the completion of a deed of variation.
Thank you. Have we got any questions from the committee for Terence arising from his report? Councillor Whittam.
Just looking at pages 18 and 19 in the pack, the colour of the building seems to have changed, and has the amount of balcony space changed, because there seem to be smaller spaces between the columns?
Thank you, Chair.
Could you perhaps switch those slides so that everyone can understand the point that Councillor Whittam is making?
Yeah, if we could flick to... Yeah, that one. Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. The colour was one of the points that was actually raised by the GLA when the building was made slightly taller, because the contrast, it was considered, you'll recall the last view that was presented to this committee showed the Dome of St Paul's and the Western Towers, and the contrast of the sort of goldish colour, the reflectivity of the balconies, in contrast with the dark brick, would have stood out a little bit stronger in the backdrop, and so it was felt to go to a more sort of muted tone. That was the change that led the change in materials. So it was a sort of beneficial change, but also we thought that that sort of contrast was actually quite strong. It lent itself more to a kind of more the tones of the nearby area and the historic buildings in the area. So that's where that was what drove that decision. As for the balconies, there was a sort of articulation in terms of the proportions of the building that meant that we looked at pushing the balconies to the edges of the building to try and slim the building down and retain the original proportions of the building, rather than put because it was made slightly wider when the as well as slightly taller. So this would sort of basically reconfigured the balconies to push them to the edges and the corners. But as to the sizes, Terence can answer that.
So the balcony sizes are in alignment with the consent. The one-bedroom units would have a minimum of 5 square metres. 2-bed, 3-person units would have a minimum of 6. 2-bed, 4-person units would have a minimum of 7, and any dwelling with 3 bedrooms or more would have a minimum of 10 square metres. And taking the shortfall in balcony spaces between the 5 to 10 metres, adding that to the requirement for communal amenity space, the development would be providing, about 700 square metres in excess of the minimum requirements in terms of amenity spaces. So there will be enough space for people.
So just to confirm that, so every flat will have a balcony? Because I spotted the same thing as Councillor Whittam. It does appear on the block where it's stepped down. It appears there's no balconies there, but it's just they're provided elsewhere in those homes. Good. Okay, thank you. Any further questions from members? Councillor Papula.
Chair. I wanted further clarification as to why the contribution to the 12 plus age group only increased by roughly £6,000 when there's an increase of homes on the entire scheme of 60 homes. Could you provide further clarification as to why that's the case?
It's based on the GLA child yield calculator. It looks at the housing mix and the tenure of the units, and it assigns a prediction of how many children will live in that block. And what we do is we took the figure that was given for the 12 plus age group, and we multiplied that by the charge that's set out in the SPD for child play space, and that generated the figure that got us up to the 115,000. It's been verified by the GLA.
Any further questions? In that case, can we move on to any objectors to the application? We've not been notified of any, but if there are any objectors in the audience, please feel free to come forward to the table at the front. No, I take that as no objectors. In that case, have we got the applicant or the applicant's agent, please? So if you'd like to introduce yourselves, then you've got, after you've done that, we'll give you 3 minutes to present to the meeting. Yes, so it's the right-hand button.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members. I'm Jake Brodetsky, the Joint Ventures Partnership Director at Notting Hill Genesis, with responsibility for our work on the Aylesbury estate. NHG is the Council's development partner for the FDSC and the applicant for this Section 73 application, which consists of 321 new homes and forms the final phase of this initial part of the...
and your colleague is?
Oh, apologies.
Hello, I'm Patrick Grinsold from HGH. We're the agents for the application.
Thank you. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. So NHG is committed to delivering the highest quality new homes at the Aylesbury estate, and this Section 73 amendment has been brought forwards following a review of the approved scheme conducted in full consultation with your planning and design officers together with the GLA. NHG has also engaged in regular consultation with local residents, including in-person events, online events and an exhibition. The key elements of the proposal which I'd like to draw to the committee's attention are an exemplary and high quality design developed with extensive consultation with the council, design officers, planning officers and the GLA. The delivery of 60 additional homes, which brings about an increase in affordable habitable rooms from 41 to 47% on the FDSC site, with an additional 9 social rented homes and 18 shared ownership homes. The delivery of a significant number of family-sized homes, a significant increase in cycle parking, and sustainability enhancements, which include an updated energy strategy, resulting in a significant 62% carbon reduction saving against the baseline, a policy-compliant urban greening factor score, and net gain in biodiversity. As was alluded to earlier in the committee, with the addendum report, the requirements around fire compliance and building design are rapidly changing, and fire compliance is of the utmost importance to NHG, and we take the matter very seriously. And we're actively monitoring changes in this area and amending our approach to ensure that we meet all requirements in place at the time. Our appointed fire consultants have worked with the design team from the outset to address the issue of fire safety and to engage with the Council, the GLA, the Health and Safety Executive and the London Fire Brigade. The design team have developed proposals for fire safety which create a safe environment for all residents. The proposals include firefighting and fire evacuation lifts, sprinklers throughout the buildings, smoke extract from corridors, safe protected spaces for vulnerable residents to await rescue, and no combustible elements within the building facades. We're fully committed to the early delivery of the FDSC development, and we're very keen to make a start early next year. This is assisted by grant funding from the GLA under the Affordable Homes Programme 2016 to 2021, but in order to secure this funding, the development must commence on site prior to the 31st of March 2023. I'd encourage members to support their officer's carefully considered recommendation and resolve to approve the application this evening. Should you have any questions or require any clarification, I'm supported here today by members of the team. Thank you.
Thank you, and well within time. Any questions from the committee? That's remarkable. I'm just trying to thank you very much for coming here. Do you want to perhaps outline why you've needed to make these adjustments to increase the size of the development? I think would be useful, because that hasn't been covered in the presentation so far.
Yep, thank you, Chair. It came about from a desire to move forward with the scheme and looking at the detail of the design and working through that to come up with an implementable and deliverable scheme. The changes have come about through a series of needs, one looking at the mix, the viability of the mix, and then also the configuration of the scheme and how it was laid out, particularly in the taller element of the building. There were certain improvements that could be made to the configuration of the internal space, the core locations, and the number of flats around that core. We started this conversation in detailed dialogue with your regeneration colleagues, with your planning colleagues, and with your design colleagues. And it was very much an iterative process, looking at how the scheme could be improved across the board. And that's resulted in this. It's quite a lengthy process, a sort of lengthy sort of iterative design process, looking at, for example, the tower, that to increase the sort of, or to allow for the improved circulation, improved core and efficiency around the core, that added a flat per floor as the building went up, which fattened the base of the tower, understandably. And then in conversation with your officers, actually that sort of skewed the proportions of the tower. So by then looking at increasing the height slightly, it returned the proportions to where the approved scheme had been in terms of the elegance of the tower moving forward. And then the further work, as Mr. Sakaris has highlighted, around looking at the location of the sort of balcony space and the materials, that all enhanced the proposals you have before you this evening. Hopefully that answers the question.
That's helpful, thank you. Any further questions from committee? In that case, I have one further question, which is just, I mean, you've talked about this being an iterative process since the original application to get where we are today. Could you just outline how the local community was involved in that process?
Yeah, so NHG has got a range of resources available to us through our work at the Aylesbury estate, and that team has led a really intensive consultation with the local community, which we've undertaken through using the Aylesbury Now website, on which all consultation material is published and shared, through regular newsletters with residents, through exhibitions and other online consultations, and then through speaking with our residents and providing drop-in opportunities for them to speak either formally or informally with us and to raise their views. We've made significant efforts to meaningfully consult with the local community, and we feel that their input has been valuable in us developing the proposals, and we feel that it has been a very successful and inclusive process.
Thank you. Councillor Papula.
just to build upon that question, it would be good to find out if you've had further talks or consultations with the local councillors in that ward.
Yes, so as part of the process that we go through, the local councillors are shared with the local, the newsletters which we produce. We've held drop-in events which they've been invited to, and we've spoken with them about the proposals.
Thank you. No further questions? You can return. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. So you can return to the public gallery. Thank you. Are there any supporters who live within 100 metres of the site in the room that would like to speak? Again, I can't see any indications that there are. There are no ward councillors present either in the room at the moment. So that brings us to the any further questions you have from officers arising from the presentations? No further questions. Would any member like to speak further on the item before we move towards making a decision? Councillor Whittam.
I do like the proposed colour better than the original. I think it looked quite stark before. Looks much warmer now. And as it's already got consent, that's why we don't need to scrutinise it quite so heavily as we normally do, just to make sure that NHG know that we normally scrutinise very carefully any new housing development.
That's absolutely correct. This may be a meeting held close to Christmas, but it doesn't mean we're in a Christmassy mood. Councillor Papula.
Yeah, no, I think the scheme is good. Of course, I will always be a stickler for more affordable homes, but from what I've seen and heard, it's not viable to get more affordable homes into the additional 60 that's proposed. But yeah, no, it's a great scheme, and long may that continue. So yeah.
Thank you. Any further comments? In that case, I'd like to move towards a recommendation. So I'd like to ask that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 to 6 of the report at pages 27 and 28 of the main agenda pack. So firstly, that planning permission is granted subject to conditions set out in the report and the addendum report, referral to the Mayor of London and the applicant entering into an appropriate legal agreement by no later than the 31st of January 2023. That the updated environmental information be taken into account as required by Regulation 26(1) of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017 as amended, and that the Planning Committee, in making a decision, has due regard to potential equalities impacts that are outlined in the report, and that following the issue of planning permission, the Director of Planning and Growth writes to Secretary of State, notifying them of the decision, pursuant to Regulation 31A of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017, and that following issue of the planning permission, the Director of Planning and Growth place a statement on the statutory register pursuant to Regulation 28(1) of the TCP/EIA Regulations 2017, which contains information required by Regulation 28, and for the purposes of Regulation 28(1)H, being the main reasons and considerations on which the Planning Committee's decision was based, shall be set out in the report, and that in the event the requirements of 1 are not met by the 31st of January 2023, that the Director of Planning and Growth be authorised to refuse planning permission, if appropriate, for the reasons set out in paragraph 184 of this report. Does any member of the committee wish to second this rather lengthy recommendation? Councillor Roberts, thank you. We don't have any amendments proposed, so we'll take matters to a vote. First of all, Councillor Whittam, how would you like to vote on this matter?
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
For, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
For, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Richard Livingstone, and I'm voting for the recommendation. The motion is carried. That brings us to the end of that item, so we've agreed that application. We will have a 5-minute comfort break, no more. And I'm going to time people this time.
everybody. The next item we have on our agenda is item 21 AP 1667, which is 310 to 330 St James's Road, Southwark, SE1 5JX, and that is set out in pages 137 to 285 of the main agenda pack, and in pages 1, 2, 5 and 6 of the addendum report. So I can I ask who's presenting on this one? So this is you, Colin. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. There's an addendum report which was circulated. Terence made reference to it earlier. Part of the addendum report covers the possibility of changes to building regulations in respect of 1 and 2 core stair core fire escapes, and what the options might be if those things were to come about. But the addendum does note that at the moment there isn't a timetable for introducing those changes to the building regulations, but nonetheless gives you some commentary on what the consequences of that might be. But as officers, we're still recommending this scheme for approval, and I'll set that out in my presentation to you. So the scheme is for the demolition of the existing building and the construction of a 7, 8 and 19-storey residential blocks over a podium of commercial use. There would be 35%, just over 35% affordable housing by habitable room, and in total there'd be 153 homes. The building would be 62 metres high above ordnance datum. And there would be 1,216 square metres of light industrial space and 33 square metres of community space provided within the building. It would also involve the retention of one of the older buildings on site, which we do think has some character and interest, local area. So that's a welcome aspect to the scheme as well. This shows you the site at the moment. The building closest to you, which has Unity Traders on it, is the site. It's part of the site itself, which is a kind of 1950s industrial building, and then beyond it, you can see a 3-storey building called the Chevron Buildings, which was a commercial use but was converted to residential with permitted development rights. So that didn't require planning permission, but it is in a residential use at the moment. And then as you come down St James's Road, heading towards Rotherhithe New Road, this is also part of the site, Fire Technics Systems. So that's basically an office block with a car park, and that's a firm who specialise in fire safety. Next slide, please. And this is kind of looking at the rear wall of Fire Technics, which is the white painted in parts, and the other part is brick. And then, sorry, you can just go back one. You can just see what's called a rocker building, which is the building with the hipped and pitched roof. It's a little 3-storey Victorian workshop building, which is going to be kept within the scheme. And that's something that is an aspiration of the area action plan. So something the applicants is happy to do. Next slide. In terms of impacts on conservation areas and listed buildings, the nearest listed buildings are the school, just off Marlborough Grove and Rolls Road, the Canal Grove cottages, which are just off Sandgate Street, and the Civic building. The building itself isn't listed, but the mural around the base of the Civic building is listed. There's also a couple of conservation areas, one relatively new on the Royal London buildings, which is bottom right, and then to the top left you have an older conservation area, including quite a lot of listed buildings. But there are no conservation areas or listed buildings immediately adjacent to the site. Next slide, please. The site allocation includes the aspiration to provide new homes, also to replace commercial uses, particularly light industrial uses, and to provide some public open space, which is set out in the Area Action Plan Indicative Master Plan. Next slide, please. This is the site allocation OKR11. The buildings in the sort of orange buff colour are buildings which are we thought were of townscape merit, so they're not listed, they're not conservation area, but we felt it was worth seeing if some of those could be kept within any redevelopment. The one identified on the blue arrow is the Rocker building, and that will be kept. The one to the south isn't part of this application, that's the L-shaped building to the south. The Fire Technics building is a sort of small L-shaped building next to the building that is being kept. That would go in this scheme, but it was never necessarily a requirement to keep all of the building. And we feel that the one that's being kept is the better quality of the two on site. You can see that the site allocation looks to deliver 1,200 homes on the site, and so the 153 homes within this scheme make a significant contribution to that provision of housing. Next slide, please. This is the indicative master plan in the area action plan, and the applicants have used the indicative master plan to inform their design. So as we set out in the report, we feel that they are delivering the requirements of the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan draft, both in terms of use and also layout of the scheme. Next slide, please. The Area Action Plan sets out building typologies, and this is how uses are mixed on the site. So this is housing over commercial uses. And for this site, what we're looking for was small industrial units with residential over. So that would include off-street servicing and would be the kind of light industrial use that you can accommodate with residential. So not uses which don't work with residential. There are a lot of similar uses already in the Old Kent Road. There are about 400 businesses in the Old Kent Road, about 10,000 people working in those businesses. So it's very much the provision of that kind of use. And in addition, there is a requirement in the conditions and also within 106 to fit out that space and to provide affordable workspace. So it wouldn't just be a shell and core, there would be workspace that you could move into if you're a business, and some of that would be affordable workspace. Next slide, please. So this is the scheme. As I said, 7, 8 and 19 stories. The 7 and 8 stories are onto St James's Road. That's in Block C and B. And Block A is the 19-storey building. The affordable housing is primarily in C and B, with the private housing in A. The taller building has been set back off St James's Road to lessen its impact on St James's Road and also its impact on residents on the opposite side of the street on St James's Road. Something that's been considered in the daylight sunlight part of the main report. And the amenity for the space would be provided at podium level, but also at ground floor. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the proposed scheme versus the master plan in more detail. I mean, what we're showing here essentially is that this has pretty closely followed what we proposed in the area action plan in terms of layout and also in terms of scale. So it establishes a route through the site, which would ultimately lead to a park space, which would run north to south within this allocation. And it also establishes a space around the Rocker building, which has been a really useful way of providing on-site play space, particularly for older children. Next slide, please. The mix of affordable housing is policy compliant, so it's 25% social rent, 10% intermediate, 35%, just slightly over 35% in all, I think 35.1%. So really useful for the delivery of affordable housing aspirations in the Old Kent Road. Next slide, please. The mix of larger family homes is mostly skewed towards the social housing element of the scheme. There are 2 4-bedroom flats within the scheme. So strong feedback from ward members in the Old Kent Road is a desire to have some larger units above 3 beds and to have some 4 beds. So they have been included in this scheme. Next slide, please. This shows you the ground floor layout. Sorry. Oh, pardon me. Sorry about that. So this shows you the ground floor layout with a light industrial workspace and a mix of cycle parking and bin stores, and also access to the residential above, with the retained rocker building having the play space around it and the public realm formed by the east-west connection at ground floor level. Next slide, please. The quality of residential design is high, so all the flats are minimum space standards or above, and the provision of balcony spaces is generous. So on the affordable housing, all the affordable housing has 10 square metre balconies. That's the 1, 2 and 3 beds. So a very high quality generally, but particularly in the affordable housing element. Next slide, please. On the affordable housing and on the private, there's a mix of recessed and projecting balconies. All the 3 beds have 10 square metres, and there is a slight shortfall in private amenity, but if you assume our aspiration to have 10 square metres for absolutely every flat, but that is more than made up for in the communal space provided on the site. Next slide, please. And just to summarise the quality of accommodation issue, there are no more than 8 flats per core, in some instances less, in some cases down to 3 to 6. 76% of the units would be dual aspect, so low core loadings, very high dual aspect, very good balcony sizes. They've been designed to mean there's minimal overlooking. As I say, the size of the units will either meet or comfortably exceed minimum standards for space. The applicant has assessed daylight within the homes, and it's of a good quality. Next slide, please. So, private, all units have balconies, all have private amenity space. Also, all social rented units have a minimum of 10 square metres private amenity space. The communal space proposes 50 square metres plus the shortfall in private amenity, which comes to 126 square metres, which is easily met on site. And 582 square metres play space is required, and 587 square metres is provided. It says on the roof there, but it also includes the ground floor play space, which is where the over 12 play space is provided. Next slide, please. So this is the younger children's play space, which is on the podium. Details would be secured by condition. All of the residents of the blocks would have access to this space. So there'd be a fob system, so even if you're in the block, which is separate from the 2 blocks you can see there, you can still access this space. Next slide, please. The ground floor play space is accessible to everybody, and that's aimed at the older age group. And you'll be aware that it's often quite a struggle to get older children's play into these things. The rocker building would be used again for commercial use. There is a live-work unit there at the moment, which has been there for some years. Part of it would continue to be used as that. Part of it would be used as a communal space. We think it's a good place to put a communal space because it's got this play facility around it. and it's also part of the landscaping for the residents of the building. Next slide, please. So the total amenity area is 847 square metres. All the play space requirements are made, and actually there is a surplus of communal amenity space overall. So for a relatively dense scheme, this does really well for amenity space. Next slide, please. Building heights, as discussed, shorter towards St James's Road, towards the rear of the site. And the outlines you can see in the back are the rest of the area action plan, master plan. So there are proposals within the draft master plan for taller buildings to be built to the rear of the site. So eventually it will be seen in that context. Next slide, please. This is a view looking down St James's Road towards the Bermondsey Works building. So you're familiar with the Bermondsey Works building, which was completed about 4 or 5 years ago, I think. And that's looking towards Old Kent Road. So you can see the taller building at the back and the somewhat shorter buildings to the front of the scheme. And that includes the off-street servicing provision for the commercial uses. So something we thought was really important to achieve that off-street servicing, something Alex worked on with them so that makes that business use more credible and usable. Next slide, please. There is a consent which committee, I think, looked at probably 2 years ago now to extend the Chevron apartments. And this grey outline shows that four-storey, I think it's four-storey extension on top of the Chevron apartments. We've never actually issued the planning permission for that, so we never signed off the Section 106. And we have been talking to the applicants as to whether they want to complete that, and they haven't shown any interest in completing it, so we may just have to issue a refusal. So Steve, the Director of Planning Growth, Steve Platts, is still delegated to refuse that permission. As we understand it, they can't find any funding to take the scheme forward, and it's got kind of rather difficult with the way that things work with the existing residents in there as well. Next slide, please. These are views looking from the junction of St James's Road with Rotherhithe New Road. Next slide. This is looking from Marlborough Grove. So in effect, if you go into Marlborough Grove, you can look into, this is the back of the bathhouse. So the bathhouse is the yellow brick building, which kind of faces McDonald's. And if you go down Marlborough Grove, you look into the service yard for the Six Bridges Estates. So this is looking through the Six Bridges Estates. You can see on the right of the image the new Bermondsey Works, and then on the left is this scheme. So not out of scale really, with development already completed in the Old Kent Road. Next slide. Really a commitment to really good design detail and materiality. So again, following the area action plan, design guidance about the use of brick and materials that give a kind of an industrial feel. And so again, the architect I think has shown that this can be done in a really fine and considered way, giving a really good quality outcome. Next slide, please. And the final details would all be secured by condition, but the applicants and the applicant's architect has put a lot of work into showing us how that would be detailed out. Details around windows, around balconies, and materiality, which are all really very encouraging. Next slide, please. This is the existing Rocker building and how it would be retained. Part of it, as I said, would be used as a communal use, part of it as commercial. But it's a kind of remnant of part of the history of the area, and it's also a kind of nice way of organising some open space around it. And next slide, please. The main report contains analysis of daylight, sunlight. Inevitably, there are impacts of daylight and sunlight. The applicant has considered not only the impact of their own scheme, some of the objectors did raise concerns about cumulative impacts of daylight, sunlight of these schemes on them. I think particularly on the opposite side of the road and the 2-storey and 4-storey residential homes opposite. So the applicant has provided analysis of cumulative impact of both what would happen if this scheme were implemented and if Chevron apartments were implemented as well. Whilst there are some impacts on daylight and sunlight, as set out in the main report, they're not considered to be that significant. In the majority of cases, the majority of windows affected pass BRE guidelines. Where they're failing them, by and large, they're not failing them by a huge margin. So as officers, we're saying that, yes, there are some impacts, but we don't think that that's significant. And actually, if you look at the schemes together, so what's the aggregate impact? The impact of building the Chevron buildings, even if it were ever to be built, makes no difference to the impact on neighbours. Next slide, please. So the levels retained are considered acceptable, and there are some impacts on Clodden Close, not Archer's Lodge. Archer's Lodge is the building more or less opposite the 8-storey building here. So kind of on the junction of St James's Road and Rotherhithe New Road. But the losses aren't considered to be significant. Next slide, please. Servicing, something that Alex had worked on. So most of the servicing comes into the service yard. So you would have seen in other images a kind of an archway off St James's Road. So servicing will go in there. That services the light industrial uses, which are coloured the pink colour. And some servicing would be off street as well for the blocks to the south, but the majority of it would be from the service yard, including for the particularly for the bin stores. So a lot of work put in on managing the bin store collection in what is a relatively dense development. Next slide, please. This shows you the bin stores, the dark orange. There's also a bulky waste store. So if you live in a block of flats with a bin store, you've probably experienced people trying to get rid of their mattresses and bits of furniture, which can be a real nuisance. So there is a provision for a bulky bin waste store here, so stuff can be put in that rather than just ditching it on the street and hoping the council will come and collect it. The other image is of the movement from the bin stores to our bin lorries. So we generally keep that to 10 metres, which is the distance that colleagues in waste like us to work to. Next slide, please. So finally, in summary, 153 new homes, of which 35.1% would be affordable. There is an uplift in employment density and improved floor space provision. So rather than the shed which is there at the moment, this is a purpose-built commercial space which would be fitted out at the cost of the applicants, and 10% of it would also be affordable workspace. A very high quality of accommodation for future residents. We think a minimal impact for a scheme of this scale, a minimal impact on neighbouring residents, complies with the aims of the Area Action Plan and also the New Southwark Plan. There would be a 64% saving on carbon dioxide emissions, so there would be some payments of carbon offset funding, but still a relatively good performance in terms of climate change issues. So on that basis, we're recommending that the scheme is granted approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Any questions to Colin? Councillor Whittam.
Just going back to the servicing on page 59 of the members' pack. I can't quite work out the disabled parking is it all under block A?
Yes.
So how do occupants of B and C access those spaces?
So if you're in the other blocks, you can still get to it, and this is where you'd need access across the different cores. So I could just point out. It's also a question you can ask the applicants, but I'll try and explain. So if you're going into here, come out through there, go through there, and then to there. So you can get from here to here or here to here. So as long as you're in here and you have an access to all of these cores, then you can get to your space without having to go out on the street and in through the main entrance.
It's quite a long walk for disabled in the affordable section.
I suppose bear in mind the affordable is this block and this block. So certainly if you're in here, you come down into your court here, and then if you had all these two spaces, then you're directly you're kind of living above it basically. You're right, it is more of a walk if you're coming to here, but it's not a particularly long kind of movement to get to there. And the other thing is that this and again the applicant can back on this getting through those doors would mean that if you were clearly if you were in a wheelchair, then they would have to be arranged so that they're doors which can open for you. You're not having to struggle through the doorways to get access to the disabled spaces. So that's certainly, something that we could ensure through something like a condition.
That might be helpful because I think Councillor Whittam makes a good point, and I can understand if you were living in Block B, so effectively you're living above the podium where that car park is, that's probably not too much of an issue. If you're coming from Block C, it feels like it is more of an issue. So maybe that's something to raise with the applicants when we go through it to make sure that the flats which are designed for people with disabilities are in Block B. That might be a question to follow up. Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
It was actually just a follow-up on that. So, would they have to go outside to get to Block C from there as well if they were going? So that would be, wet weather as we've had recently. That would be an issue, I think, if they were in a wheelchair or difficulty walking.
Yes.
So I think we.
So it goes to Richard's point that it goes to the chair's point that if those accessible units were in that block, then you would have to go out of the block to cross and go into the other block. So perhaps a way around that would be to see if the accessible units are all within the block with the car parking spaces within them. And then can I just say they may be, but might be something worth asking the applicants.
Thank you. Good point. Further questions? I've got a few. First of all, paragraph 340 sets out quite a lengthy section on how the scheme was reviewed by the Community Review Panel, which is something that the council has set up with identified members of the local community to look at planning applications, and this is shown good practice by going before them, and the report says that the final design we have has responded to some of those points made by the community review panel. Can you summarise perhaps how some of those changes have fed through, or is that a question that's better put to the applicants?
Sorry. Sorry, Richard.
So it's paragraph 340, so it's at pages 94 or 231, depending on how you want to read the report, to 96/233. So it's 340.
340?
Yeah. Paragraph 340. Yeah. So it's quite a lengthy bit, so
Yeah.
apologies for that, Colin.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks, Richard. There were, as you can see from the main report, there were quite a number of views expressed by the community review panel. But I would say, some of the ones which have translated into the scheme, and I'm sure the applicant can say a bit about this as well because they attended the community review panel with officers. Include the possibility of having a communal space, stroke co-working space within the scheme, and certainly part of the drive of the community space provided in the Rocker building, I think, came from the community review panel's view of this. They also, whilst they didn't have a problem per se with a tall building on the site, they did make some suggestions about overall building heights, and certainly part of the conversation between officers and the applicants, which was informed by the CRP, related to the height of buildings on St James's Road, and the applicant can probably talk to you about that as well. Actually, one of the nice things about the feedback from the community review panel was they were positive about many of the detailed aspects of the scheme, such as the use of archways for the main kind of entrance to the commercial space, and certainly one of the things that they were very keen to know about was the provision of amenity space within the scheme, and particularly around play space and balcony space, and something I've emphasised in the presentation, but I'm sure the applicant can talk about as well. I think that has then fed through into this application. And actually, one of the things they fed back to us as well, it's obviously comes from ward councillors, not only from ward councillors, but also the community review panel, is about the importance of larger units, family-sized units within the scheme, and hence the 4 beds and the weighting of the 3 beds within the scheme towards that. The route through was something that the panel felt was a good thing, but quite reasonably they raised some issues, and indeed we've had conversations with the applicant team about security in the kind of immediate and longer term with that site, because is it the right thing to have people just walking in there at 24 hours a day? So one of the things we had discussed was getting a balance between those things, and perhaps having some limited access to that, so it could be secured of an evening. So yeah, I think there's the community review panel was really useful. Certainly the feedback I got from the applicant will probably confirm from the applicant's team was that it was very helpful. And I think the applicant has responded to many of the points that were raised, but I'm sure they could say a bit more about that when they come to do their presentation.
Thank you. So, second question I wanted to ask was about daylight impacts, particularly on Archer's Lodge.
Because you showed us a slide on this, but it was a slide that I was having difficulty making head or tail of what it actually meant. So this is slide 58 of the pack. If we could show that, just to understand that. Because I understood it was what it was showing, but wasn't clear as how it was demonstrating the issue of daylight or sunlight. There we go. Back one, 58. So that one, that's it. So Archer's Lodge, for people who don't know, is the building with the hip roofs in the middle there. Yeah.
It's Archer's Lodge.
So this drawing to me just showed where things lay. It didn't really, I wasn't quite clear how it was demonstrating the daylight impacts, Colin. So have I missed something here, or is that not the purpose of this diagram?
Yes, and sorry, probably should have explained that. Sometimes you show these diagrams, and what they're illustrating is the daylight sunlight impacts graphically. That's not the case with this diagram. This is just showing you where the scheme is in red and the nearby buildings which have been tested. And for Archer's Lodge, it is the case, as set out in 217 to 219 of the report, that the 16 windows which were tested did fall below the BRA guidelines, but the extent to which they fell below the guidelines was not huge. So it's not unusual that you get something which doesn't quite meet BRA guidelines. But then it depends on the degree to which that happens. And we felt in this instance that impact was not that great. And that was testing through BSC and also average sunlight hours as well. And actually on the average sunlight hours, all of the windows that were tested passed the BRE tests. So in some there was a slight failing of a BRE test, in others they all passed. So it's taking all those things together and balancing them. We thought that Archer's Lodge, the impacts were still acceptable.
Thank you. And final question I have is about the Rocker building, which is an interesting aspect to all of this. All the diagrams that we've got in here show the view from the north, which is obviously where most development will view it. Slide 56 seems to show us change, which might well be quite welcome in terms of the fenestration of the building. Just to be clear that those bricked up arches are being opened up in the diagrams, is that right, to sort of so they're double height windows, yes. That proposal, right. And the other question I had is, I'm not sure I've ever been to this side of the building. I have been the other side of the building, because if I ever have to deliver leaflets around there, that's the side I have to go to find the letterboxes. So what I do know on the south side of the building is that there's a steel staircase, which doesn't appear to be external staircase. It doesn't appear to be kept here, so just to understand whether that is the case, whether that's being removed, or because obviously that is a bit of an architectural feature of the building at the moment.
I think the proposals were to remove it, but again, I mean, that's something the architect and developer team can cover. I mean, certainly one of the things we're asking for by condition is details of the windows and the details of the changes that are made to the building. So clearly one of the things that we have discussed with the applicant and the architects team is the importance of in some ways not over-restoring the building. So, you know, if you give it such a clean up that you don't even know it's an old building anymore. But I know the stay you're talking about, certainly the current proposal is that doesn't stay, but there would be access internally to the upper parts of the building.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming.
I'm just wondering what the significance of the rocker building is, because it doesn't leap out of the slides at me.
Yeah, it was, we believe it was part of an old factory that did something called japoning. So japoning is basically a lacquering technique, and this is yeah. So it's partly so it's not just the kind of architecture; it's also historic, and I think as well it gives the rest of the building a kind of link, the new building, a sort of link to a past that would otherwise completely be gone. So would this building ever be listed? No. It's a single building, so would it ever be part of a conservation area? No. But nonetheless, Old Kent Road, where there are very few older buildings that survive, I think if it was somewhere else in the borough, it would probably not be something that we would be looking to keep. But in the Old Kent Road, the surviving originals are few and far between. So that's one of the reasons we asked the developers to try and integrate it into the new scheme.
Councillor
Thank you.
Councillor Papula.
My question is about cycling. So I know on 252 that there's a shortfall of 31 spaces, and that's due to the size of the scheme. I just wanted clarification as to whether the council will be getting some sort of compensation for that significant shortfall in bike stand first and foremost. It's also noted on 253 that there are also proposals for larger cycle racks, but a number hasn't been provided, so it would be good to get further clarification. Of course, this may be a question to put to the applicant as to how many there will be. Yeah, so those are my two questions.
Yeah, in terms of the final design of the cycle racking, I think we have that down as a condition. Just one of the things I think TfL may have asked us for. But you're right. I don't think the numbers quite meet the new Southwark plan requirements, and I think the reason primarily is because that policy kind of changing during the lifetime of this application. But again, it's something the applicant might be able to help you out with. But essentially, Alex's view on this was that with a carefully designed cycle parking provision within the scheme, that there is an opportunity. There is sufficient cycle parking provided, and whilst we don't make a charge for any shortfall, there is a Section 106 contribution which would be secured to the TfL cycle hire network, which is set out in paragraph 256. So we think that will help towards encouraging cycling more generally in the area, albeit that there is somewhat of a shortfall on our latest policy requirements for cycle parking scheme.
Councillor Papula.
Yeah, that's great for transport for London, but of course I'm trying to focus on monies that will come to the council due to a shortfall. So of course I'll ask the applicant that. Also on 254, there's a nice little line saying that cycle parking is proposed along the new east-west route, but once again that's not really nailed down And again, this may be a further question for the applicant, but I think it would be good to nail that down as an obligation in the 106 that is provided, because it would go quite some way to offset the shortfall of 31 bike stands.
Yeah, I mean, again, something to ask the applicant, but I don't think that. I think that securing that cycle parking in that space, I think could be part of the 106 without any problem at all.
Councillor Whittam.
Just coming back to the disabled bays, how many of those have EV charging points? Doesn't say on 237.
Sorry, just bear with me. Yes, you're right, Councillor Whittam. It doesn't say whether or not there are EV parking points there. So again, I think something worth raising with the applicant. And I believe they will be able to, although it's not mentioned in the report, I believe they will be able to confirm that all of those would have EV charging points. Again, it's
we can confirm that with the applicant.
We can confirm that with the applicants. Yeah.
And if that's true, can we put that in a condition?
We can, yes.
We can ask the applicant whether they're happy with that. I'm sure they will be. Any further questions? Councillor Papula.
Yep, no, it's a quick one from me, maybe a point of clarification, which again, I might ask the applicant instead, to be honest. But I've noticed that the bins, maybe I've got that wrong, the one for Block C is inside, whilst for A and B, it's outside. Why is that the case? There's mention of a bin located inside the social housing block, yet for some reason the bins on block B and A aren't. I wanted clarification as to why that was the case, whether that was.
So I think this is slide 59. If we could,
probably, yeah,
we could switch to it, please.
Yeah, I just read that quite briefly and just wanted clarification as to why that was the case. Was that a design reason as to why there's a difference between the basically non-social rent block and the social rented block in terms of their bins?
So you're reading it as
Yeah, that's not outside. That's the car park, which is underneath the podium. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we can move on to the other participants in the meeting. First of all, do we have any objectors in the room? I don't believe we have any objectors, so in that case, can we ask that the applicants or the applicants' agents come forward, please? Okay, so if you'd like to both introduce yourselves, and then after you've done that, I will then give you 3 minutes to present to us. So, over to you.
Can I start? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Chair. My name's Sean McGrath. I'm from WSP. I'm the planning consultant for the application.
Okay. I'm Beatrix. I'm a director at Weston Williamson, the architects for the scheme.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, so many thanks for your time this evening. We've worked closely with the officers and the local community, listening and learning and addressing any concerns raised during the pre-application and determination periods. The site, as it's been outlined, sits within the Old Kent Road opportunity area, which is earmarked for significant housing and employment growth, and it will act as a catalyst for other sites in the master plan area. Because of this, officers were very insistent that the design had to be of the highest quality and bring forward inclusive and tangible community benefit. So the scheme delivers a new pedestrian route that will link the site in St James's Road through to the Three Bridges estate, and that can be delivered once the AOP master plan is completed. There is a community room that is affordable and accessible by the neighbourhood as well as the residents. There's a policy-compliant affordable housing offer of 35%, with high-quality public realm and all play spaces provided on site. The ground floor, older children's external play space is also for use by the wider community. A high proportion of family housing. There are 65% of 2 bedrooms or more, of which 22% of these will be 3 bedrooms or more, and 2 of those, again, will be 4 bedrooms or more. At the request of the officers, we provided these 4-bedroom units, which have generous associated amenity, which far exceeds minimum requirements. One of these has over 35 square metres of external terrace area. All homes have private balconies and communal amenity spaces provided at roof, terrace and podium. And we are also providing 1,900 square metres of new, high-quality commercial floor space, including 10% affordable workspace. And, as our social value statement explains, 40 to 50 new full-time jobs will be provided once the project is delivered, as well as the additional jobs and training that will be available during the construction of the scheme and secured by the Section 106. We engaged with the local community at the pre-app stage, sending out a newsletter to nearly 3,000 local homes and businesses. And we also presented to, as was mentioned, and engaged with the Old Kent Road Community Review Panel and ward councillors, which were extremely helpful as they challenged the design, not only from an approvals point of view, but from the position of someone who lives and works in the area and who understands what living in a scheme such as ours would mean. As a result, the design has evolved for the better and is supported by both. In terms of massing, the buildings were firstly configured to allow access to the Rocker Building, a historical building of architectural merit that is currently inaccessible to the public. It is a really charming building and will house a community use at ground floor, bringing into it public use for the first time. The main building form sits on a podium which houses the non-residential units. Uses mosaics such as those on the Civic and Livesey building will be used to identify entrances and bring arts and crafts to the design. The scheme is fully tenure blind. The massing of the new residential elements were then configured with an 8-storey street edge along St James's Road, stepping up in height to the rear of the site. This stepping mediates the increases in heights which would otherwise be a cliff edge in townscape terms and has been designed to fit in well with the height of other forthcoming development, including the Tier 1 building of over 20 storeys directly behind our site. In summary, we have worked with officers and the local community to develop a high-quality, sustainable, policy-compliant scheme that will positively regenerate a tired site in a key location. And we hope that you'll support the officer's recommendations tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Councillor Whittam.
You'll have heard my concern about the disabled bays and how the people in Block C will access them, and whether there will be EV charging.
Yeah. So I can confirm that all 5 accessible bays are EV charged. We did have one accessible bay that was next to Building C at the beginning, but it was felt that for the safety of the disabled car reversing and manoeuvring versus the public route, that wouldn't be desirable. And so when we worked with our transport consultant and TfL, all 5 bays were moved internally into the podium, so they all had equivalent and equal access, regardless of where you lived in the building. The route from the accessible bays to Building C is actually quite direct. So you're within the podium, which is essentially an unheated space, and you then go through the door straight into the door to the next building. The fully compliant M3 and M4 accessible units are split between all buildings so that you can live in any building regardless, but that use of access was carefully considered with TfL and with the with the transport officers.
Can I just add to that? We've also agreed, I think, that it'll be dealt with by condition. TfL, it's paragraph 237 in your committee report. We've agreed to have a design and management plan, a parking design and management plan. And one of the things we've got to do in there is we've got to look to see how we will provide more disabled parking as and when demand increases. So it is something that will be monitored continually.
Councillor Whittam.
So the doors into Block C, will they be able to be opened automatically, pushing a button?
Yeah, they can be powered accordingly, and that again can be part of the conditions if required.
Councillor Papula.
Yeah, so of course my question is about bikes. So of course there's a shortfall of 31, and of course my question to the officers was basically how that could be offset in terms of a formal financial payment, or to agree a condition that the proposed cycle thing noted on 254 is actually a condition noted down on inside the 106. And also, it would be good to get further clarification as to the number of possible larger or cargo bike bays that there may be, because no number is really noted down in 253. And as a borough, we are trying to move to a far more carbon neutral world, and that's a fantastic way of getting us to that end goal. So, yeah.
I think I think you kicked me under the table if I'm saying the wrong. But I think some of those matters, I think, will be the detailed design stage. There is a slight shortfall, and I think that was because TfL appreciated we were providing a lot of cycling, and they thought the quality of the cycling was better, that we could have provided, I think, more double racked cycling provision. They said they preferred to have it single racked, and it's better quality. And I think that does feed into having the larger bicycles as well. So they were happy that it was quality over quantity. And I think we are making a contribution as well, because there is a slight shortfall. I think we're making a contribution to bike hire schemes as well. But sorry, B was there.
No, I think that's it. Then also there is also all the visiting parking along that route, along the new public access route, and that's identified on the drawings. And again, we're very happy for those to form part of any condition, because they're included.
Cheers for that. So could you speak more about what you mean in terms of quality of psychograph first and foremost, and also...
Where's the transport fellow you needed? I think it was to do with, I think when we originally we had double stacked spaces or bike racks, and I think we reduced the number of those to have more single racks, which I think allows you to have larger bikes in there.
Yes, we've got provision for the electric bikes that are bigger, and then the family bikes where you can then have the attachments to them. So we were compliant, but then to be compliant we had them all double stacked, and then when we met with TfL and actually with the Southwark case offer as well, they said what's actually we're finding happening now is we need a greater degree of variety in the cycle space that we provide to allow for a much bigger mix, because all these new bike typologies keep coming. So they wanted us then to make sure that design allowed for that sort of, like, I suppose, innovation in bicycles and how they're now being used. So that's what we then went to do. So although we could provide that compliant mix, it was felt better to provide this variety and higher quality usage.
So just to really nail you down on the number, could you clarify the amount, if that's okay?
So we've got 250 long stay and 10 short stay that are split between Building A has 195 spaces, Building B has 33 spaces, and Building C has 27 spaces. And the cycle spaces were reduced to comply with GLA comments. So we've got the larger Sheffield stands that are 6% that are 15. We've got the regular Sheffield stands that are 21%, which are 56. And we've then got 73%, so 184 double-tiered bikes. We then also have for the non-residential uses, we've got one Sheffield stand, and then we've also got 12 double-tiered stands.
So will those numbers be confirmed in the 106 only because that's not really been clarified in the report that we've seen here, and that's why I'm being so insistent on numbers here?
We'd be more than happy to have a condition saying that details of the cycle parking have got to be signed off by officers or...
Yeah, so are we happy to condition that? Yeah, about those discussions? Yeah, good. Councillor Papula.
I apologise, Chair. And also, again, just to nail things down on 254, of course I am aware that there is a level of bike provision there, but there's going to be increased traffic in terms of people's in the area, and it would be, I guess, a show of goodwill if a further condition would be noted down in which you yourselves could provide more cycle hangers on that road. And I wanted to, of course, see if you were amenable in doing that, especially since there is a shortfall. Of course, you've clarified as to why there is a shortfall, but there is still a shortfall.
I think we'd be happy to. The problem would be if it goes outside the ownership of the developer, we can't really do anything if it's not within our red line. So it's difficult to say. I mean, I think the intention has always been to provide as much cycle parking as we can, and we did have detailed discussions with TfL about cycle parking, and they were happy with everything. And I think, if we could, we would. But if we go outside the red line, and there's lots of issues there as well about, will it need to be covered? Can it be open? But if it's within the site boundary, we will provide as much cycle parking as we can.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Land and Cross, the Red Line plan is public highways and thus managed by the council. So I don't believe that there's going to be a massive issue in terms of the council accepting such things.
I think probably what we need to do, I think the safest way forward on this, Councillor Papula, is to explore that through the condition and the further conversations between officers and the applicants too. I think what everybody has heard very clearly is the need to ensure that there's not a shortfall in cycle provision one way or another, and I think we need to leave it to that negotiation to resolve that. Is that okay?
That should be completely fine. I think maybe a very vaguely worded line in the 106, such as what is noted down in 254, basically stating, and also the applicant and the council will look at alternative or additional cycle hangers outside of the red line plan. Make it quite vague in that sense, so that it would be compliant.
Yeah, I think as I said, I think probably the best thing we can do is to leave officers and the applicants to work out the details about how this is done, I think. But yes, I think we take note of your point that it doesn't necessarily have to be on site. It could be in the highway immediately outside if that's what's needed to get us there, or through section 106. But yeah, Councillor Leeming, I sense this is on cycling as well.
Well, all I wanted to say is Councillor Papuda has just asked all the questions that I would have asked if he hadn't asked them first. But I wanted to just add the small point that it doesn't feel like there's enough visitor parking to me. And in the discussions you've just discussed, I'd like the visitor parking and security of cycle parking for visitors to be looked at as well.
Thank you. And taking note of that, officers, I've got a conversation going on behind my back, which I'm sure is... I'm used to people talking behind my back. Goes with the territory of being a councillor. Right. Councillor Roberts.
My question isn't about cycle parking, you'll be pleased to know. It's about the use of the Rocker building. So you said the ground floor will be a community amenity. What's the rest of the building going to be used for? Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
So the community room would be next to that older children's play area, and then that's something for the residents to use, and then also will be secured under the 106 for the wider neighbourhood to come and utilise. Then on the floor above, there's part of the, I suppose, the language of the industrial units that we'd like to bring, a smaller bespoke unit, sort of like carpentry, hat makers, those sorts of types of uses. So there's use for that on the floor above. And then the current live work unit that's in the building will be remained, but renovated and then brought into use. So those are the 3 tiers of the building. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. I want to follow up on that question about the Rocker building, and as I said, the appearance from the south of the building, because that's not clearly covered in this, and just to understand that a bit more, because I think if you do see the building at the moment, that's where you see it at the moment, albeit you have to find your way through a courtyard. It's not visible from the street or anything at the moment.
So yeah, when you come, currently the Rocker building, it's been it's been sort of like put upon, so there's like a lean-to next to it on one side, and then quite a few of the openings have been bricked up, and then there's a stair that is actually an access stair, so it's not an original stair at all, but the stair you talked about at the front is an access stair for the people who live in the live and work unit right up at the top, so they've got to go up this external add-on, ad hoc metal staircase. So what we'd like to do is take away all the lean-to buildings against it, so you actually begin to see, because it really is a charming building. I know I think one of the council said, I'm not entirely sure why, but you can't access it, but when you do go to it, it really does have some charm and some rhythm that we've used to influence the design. So the idea isn't to strip it back and make it shiny new, the idea is to return it to its original form. So to remove that staircase, to open up where some of the openings have been blocked, to open up some of the other ones, to provide that access and then that invitation from the new public route, so that people, I think when you're walking into a scheme and you can't get the public route yet, just to do with the phasing, you want to be able to feel that there's somewhere you can go to and it's open and welcome. So the opening of the arches at the back will allow that visibility and that route through, so that people in the neighbourhood as well as the residents will be able to sort of feel that they've got ownership of that building and the area around it.
Thank you. I'd like to reassure Councillor Leeming, it does look slightly better from the south side at the moment, albeit under these changes it may be improved on both sides. The other question I had was going back to the comments made by the design review panel, and just to talk a little bit about how you've responded to the point they made about making the St James's Road frontage more active, and just to talk a little bit about that, what happened.
Yeah, so the community review panel, I'd not been to one before, and it was really, really, really helpful. I think for an architect, for having people who live in the area, know the area, actually looking at the scheme and saying this is what we need was really, really helpful. So they talked about a lot of things. They talked, first of all, the balcony design. The entire balcony design changed as a result of the community review panel. There's a lady there who's so beautifully eloquent, and she talked about an introvert and an extrovert and how people with different personalities seek different things from their homes, and making sure that when you were able to choose a home, you had one where maybe you wanted a bit more of a private balcony, so you wanted something recessed in, or maybe actually you were quite happy to sit out and have your coffee. And the one thing they also talked about was identity, and so being able to, when you came down St James's Road, being able to identify where you lived within quite a dense development was a really key thing. So when we went back from that design, from the CRP, we went and reviewed all the balcony designs again. So particularly for the 4-bed units that we added in, we gave even more generous balcony space. So one of them, as I think I mentioned earlier, is in excess of 35 square metres just for that larger family unit. We then started to change some of the balconies, so you did get this ability to have a private one or an open one and have choice. And then when we started to look at the design of the building and actually how the units were then grouped and changed, you'll see on the elevations that we've got some terracotta or some coloured fluted brickwork. And those then group as they go up, with windows having slightly different reveals, so that when you're there you can actually identify your building through architectural detail that allows you to say this is where my home is. It was a really, really good meeting with the community review panel. I think I learnt a lot from it, and I think it really improved the design.
Thank you very much. Councillor Papula.
You'll be glad to hear it's not about cycling. No, it's a question about the, well, what's the right word? The community room, the community centre on the site. I just wanted clarification as to how often residents will be able to access it, only because it doesn't really clarify there. It also notes that businesses will also be able to hire out the room. What's the balance, firstly, in terms of that? And also my next question is, will residents pay for it? And if they do pay for it, how much will that be? Will it be an affordable amount?
I think these matters and how it's going to be used, it's something we've effectively thought we deal with in the Section 106 agreement. I mean, we know it is for the local community, so I'm sure that officers will insist that there is some sort of charging schedule which reflects what uses are elsewhere. And to be quite honest, we haven't really got into that much detail. I mean, we're talking more about the physicality of having the space there. We know it's going to be for residents, and we've made sure it does open up and it's inviting to people, so we know that we want people to use it. But that sort of nitty-gritty detail, we thought we'd get over getting the planning consent first. That's good before we went into that detail. But it will be for predominantly local people living there, and then the local community.
I think we've already set out that it would be an affordable rate, and then the residents in the who live in the development, it would probably form part of the service charge or something, so it wouldn't be something. I think that's something that needs to be ironed out, but I think that was the original intention. And obviously its location next to the play area was quite key to make sure it's somewhere that, because I think you can get community rooms that people don't use because you have to go somewhere and it's not, and again, we learnt that at the community review panel, that you had to have these places that were central so that there's somewhere that everyone felt that there was sort of like I suppose like a heart for you to go to, and that's why its location was also placed there.
Thank you. Any further questions for the applicants? Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. Hope it wasn't too extensive a grilling, but if you could please return to the public seats. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any supporters in the room that live within 100 metres of the site? We do not. And we also don't have any ward councillors that aren't on the committee to speak on this item either. So that leaves us to any further questions that we have for officers. Now, that discussion about cycle storage, so it has been pointed out to me that condition 21 covers some elements of that. I don't know whether, Councillor Papula, you want to have a quick look at that to see whether it ticks the bill or whether there's anything further we need to be looking as part of that condition. Yeah, condition 21. Colin has scribbled some things. I'm going to ask Colin to decipher his own handwriting.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, it's about cycle store, and it's all written about the storage within the building. So to the points that both members of the committee have made, I think we'll have a go at redrafting that to say cycle store and external cycle storage spaces, and we can also include within that the possibility of some of that parking being on the highway, subject to speaking to our colleagues in the highways team. I mean, it's certainly worth something exploring, and you know, the applicant will obviously only do that with the agreement of our highways team, but it's something that we can add on to that condition,
with the aim of getting us to a level that's compliant with the Southwark plan. Councillor Leeming.
I should perhaps have thought this earlier, but are there any public parking spaces on the highway, and might those be used for cycle storage?
No.
Councillor Whittam.
I've just had a look through the conditions, and the electric vehicle charging point is there, paragraph 40.
Good, that saves us that condition. So we have that. So it sounds as if we're looking at that rewording of condition 21. Other than that, any other comments or questions that people have for officers? Councillor Papula.
Cheers, Chair. Just directing eyes to paragraph 46. There was mention about the community room being an inadequate size for family needs, and the officer response didn't really talk or really respond to it. It would be good just to get further clarification on officers' response on people stating that the size for the community room is inadequate.
Paragraph 46, which is on page...
on page 152.
Thank you.
Overall page 152.
Yes, I think the space proposed is 33 square metres, and I think B, who's the architect for the scheme, I think touched on this point, addressed it effectively because of its location within the communal streets, the east-west routes, and then surrounded by the play space. We think that 33 square metres would be an adequate size for a community room available for the residents within the blocks. Actually, think it probably worked pretty well. I mean, it may be that you might like to see a bit more detail in terms of a kind of, because we are requiring a fit out of the light industrial space. It could perhaps have a fit out of a kind of basic kitchen facility, which are often really helpful in community rooms. Where you've got a sink and a fridge, and if you want to hire it for a communal event or a party or something like that, so that rather than being delivered as a shell and core, it could be delivered as a space that is immediately usable for the community. It's not something that I think we've covered in the conditions, but that's something we could ask the applicants if they were willing to put in as an additional condition.
Yeah, but
Should we, one of the applicants come forward very quickly, just so on that point? So, thank you. Yeah, so we are proposing an additional condition regarding the use of the community room, just to check whether that's okay.
Yeah, that's acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Pooler, I can see you stretching.
yes. Could I, again, of course, the applicant stated that they've not gone into that much detail, but it would be good just to direct officers to ensure that the charging scheme is very much affordable to people that live there, especially as we're in a cost of living crisis, and we need to ensure that as many people access this community room as possible, but specifically those that live in Block C who are being council-wise.
Okay, thank you. So just so I understand, what we're asking is we're asking for a new condition regarding, so an agreement between officers and the applicants to develop a management plan for the use of the community room, including ensuring that that it's affordable for all residents in the development. Yeah, something on those lines. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you. Any further comments or questions? I saw a nod, so I'm taking that as assent. Is that okay?
Getting my steps up today. I think there's also a clause already in the section 106 about the affordability of the communal room. But yes, we're happy for it to be affordable. The intention is that it is affordable, and we particularly hear your comments on cost of living.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. If there are no further comments or questions, I would like to propose that we move towards a recommendation, and so I'd like to move that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 and 2 of the report on page 140 of the main agenda pack. So firstly, that the planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions set out in the report as amended in our discussions. Referral to the Mayor of London and the applicant entering into an appropriate legal agreement by no later than the 30th of April 2023.
I believe you would need to go through each of the amendments.
Amended.
Proposed, yeah.
Fine, thank you. So those conditions being an amended condition 21 regarding cycle storage, and a new condition to ensure the affordability of the community room. Is that?
And also to fit out. The fit out of the community room.
Oh, sorry, the fit out. Sorry, the fit out and affordability of the community room. Yeah, is that okay?
Chair, can we delegate whether or not it should be done by condition the affordable rental or section 106 to officers to find the best mechanism, please, because we need to check what's
Okay.
agreed already.
Well, I think what we've asked for is a condition on the fitting out and affordability. How officers and the applicants decide to exercise that and make that work will lead to your judgment. Is that okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
either section 106 or
Yeah.
condition, if you give us delegated authority, please.
Yeah. But I think committee are indicating that's
Thank you.
acceptable. Thank you. And the second recommendation is in event of the requirements of paragraph 1 not being met by the 30th of April 2023, that the Director of Planning and Growth be authorised to refuse planning permission if appropriate for the reasons set out in paragraph 309 of the report. Does any member wish to second this? I've got Councillor Papula, I think, just got there before Councillor Whittam, and as he wrote half the new recommendation, it seems only fair. Right. In that case, Councillor Whittam, how do you wish to vote on this matter?
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
For, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
For, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Livingstone, and I'm also voting for the recommendation. So the application is granted. Thank you, everybody. That brings today's meeting to an ending. Have a good Christmas and a restful break, and a Happy New Year, everyone.